relationship between anything that happened in your past and your present moment. You can decide at this moment that that was then, this is now, and you can go in a different direction. And your grades have no relevance. Forbes does the Forbes 400 every single year, and they do brief biographies of people in the Forbes 400. They found that people who dropped out of high school, if they make it to the Forbes 400, the 400 richest men and women in America, they will be worth, on average, $300 million more than people who graduated from college if they dropped out of high school and they made it. And they said, why is that? Well, they started earlier and they started harder. And they got much smarter, much faster. They had a big leap on people who are still going to college, drinking, and so on. They're already there starting their third or fourth or fifth business because they dropped out of high school. So if you got lousy grades at school, you should say, thank God I got lousy grades at school. Because that's the key to your success. All right, so anyway, my first job was a laboring job. I was washing dishes. I washed dishes, and then finally when I lost that job, I got a job washing cars with a car wash, and when I lost that job, I got a job washing floors with a janitorial service. I thought washing was in my future. My wife is very kind about that. She keeps giving me things to wash, dishes, children's bottoms, things like that. And lost when you're young is a euphemism for non-voluntary career redeployment. This is where you get a chance to explore new careers unexpectedly. Today they have severance programs to the end of the month. The severance program was to the end of the day, or sometimes the end of the hour. They used to fire you at either 5 to 12 or 5 to 5. I know because I had experiences of both. And they come up to you looking like you'd been sentenced to death and they were the executioner, and they say, we won't need your services anymore, here's your final pay, there's the door. So I'd go from place to place, and I'd say, I'm looking for a job, and they say, well, we don't need much help right now. I say, well, I'm the right person for you, because I won't be much help. And that wasn't helping me much, and I went from place to place, desperate, lined up for employment, did day labor, worked as a gardener, I dug ditches, I worked as a construction laborer, carrying heavy things from place to place. I worked in sawmills stacking lumber, I worked in the brush with a chainsaw. One summer I dug wells. Now digging wells is like a metaphor for government service. That's where you start at ground level and you work down rather than up. And when you succeed, you fail, because when you find water, they fire you. What's that? Looks like water. Well, cover it up. We need 2 more days' work here. Well diggers are not highly motivated, because if they find water, they put themselves out of work. It's like in the government, you're allowed to tinker with problems endlessly, but never solve one. Because if you solve a problem, then you put otherwise unemployable people out of work. So I would go from place to place. I worked on farms and ranches. When I was 23 years old, I was an itinerant farm laborer. I was sleeping on the hay in the farmer's barn. I was arising before dawn each morning and working all day to get the harvest in before the first frost. I ate with the farmer's family in the kitchen of the farmhouse. I was uneducated, I was unskilled, and at the end of the harvest, I was once more unemployed. And when I could no longer get a laboring job, how many people here are in sales? Well, that's what I got into too, when I couldn't get a laboring job, so I know where you're coming from. Yeah. And so I got into selling, and I was not afraid to work. Did you notice that selling is clean work? It's not digging ditches, it's not farm labor, it's clean work. So they gave me the 3-part sales training program, which is pretty much what we get in life. Here's your cards, here's your brochures, there's the door. After 1 month, they give you the first motivational program, which is, hang in there. After 2 months, they give you the real motivational program, is they sit you down and they look at you quite grimly and they say, look, if you don't sell something, pretty soon we'll have to fire you. They're not even paying you anything. You're working on straight commission, cold calling, and they're going to fire you. You don't even have a desk. Now that sometimes makes you so mad you go out and sell something just to spite them. All right? Well, I was hanging on by my fingernails. After about 6 months, it's a really important point for me. After about 6 months of hanging on by my fingernails, when I made a sale, I had to have the commission immediately, because I had to get back to my boarding house. I was paying a couple of dollars a night for a room in a boarding house, and I had an ex-Gestapo landlady. Her motto was no pay, no stay, no credit, nothing. So finally, there's this one guy in our company. He's making 5 or 10 times as much as anybody else. He's got a pocket full of $20 bills that would choke a horse. I get up at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, and I'm out there in the parking lot at 7 o'clock when people come to work. I'm working all day. I take a brief lunch, dinner between 5 and 6, and I go and knock on doors and apartment doors in the neighborhoods after dinner until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. If the light was on, I'd knock on the door. I even woke people up in their pajamas to try to sell to them. Not a good start for a sales conversation. And this guy would roll in around 9 o'clock. Prospect would come in around 9:15. They'd sit down, have a nice little chat, cup of coffee. He'd talk to him a little bit, write some on paper, and pull out his check and write a check. And he'd go out in the morning and make a couple of sales, come back, have lunch with a customer, make another sale, make a couple of... I was making one sale a week. This guy was selling with both hands like a faro dealer in Reno. I mean, it was unbelievable. And I finally, and everybody looked at him, in great awe. So finally I went to him and I said, tell me, what are you doing differently from me? How come you make so many sales? And he said, well, show me your presentation. I'll critique it for you. I said, you show me yours and I'll show you mine. I said, by the way, how do you define a sales presentation? He said, well, a sales presentation is a logical and orderly process where, first of all, you separate prospects from suspects. You then establish rapport with them. You don't try to make friends with people who have no money, I mean, obviously, or not qualified. You then identify their needs by asking them questions. You show that our product or service is the very best, all things considered, to satisfy their needs. You answer their questions or objections. You get them to take action, and then you get resales and referrals from the same people, which loops you back into prospecting. I couldn't believe it. I was writing this all the time. There's a logical process to it. I couldn't believe there was a logical process to it. I was using the blah, blah cell. Blah, 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 blah. I was hoping people would stop me and buy, and nobody was. So I wrote it all down. I said, well, don't you say this? He said, no, you don't say this. You ask questions. And so I realized that telling is not selling. Asking questions is selling. So I went out and I began to ask questions, and I would go through a logical process and make sure it was a prospect before I began talking, and then take some time to get to know them a little bit better so that we had a feeling of rapport and so on, and then identified their needs, and my sales started to inch up. And then I said, well, what else can I do? He said, have you read any books on selling? I said, are there books on selling? Well, there's thousands of books on selling. They've been written by some of the best salespeople in the history of the world. So I went out and began reading 1 to 2 hours every single morning. I'd get up at 5 o'clock and read 2 hours every morning and take notes and write them on 3x5 cards and carry them around with me. And I learned what to say and how to answer objections, how to get appointments, and how to work on the telephone. And my sales began to go up. And then I began to listen to audio programs. I still remember my first audio programs on sales. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. Here's somebody who worked for 30 years, trained 20,000 salespeople, was able to make sales, go into a town with 350 homes and make 346 sales, cold calling, knocking on doors. And just he explained, this is the psychology of selling. And then I began to go to courses like this. And every single time I took the information, I took action on it immediately. Now, this is so important. You know, many are called, but few are chosen. You've heard that thing. Many people hear these things, but they don't do anything about it. If it was just information that enabled a person to be successful, all librarians would be rich. Because they're surrounded with information, but they don't act on the information. So what I did is I try it out. And then sometimes it didn't work. And by the way, here's something that changed my life. I found that if you try something new for the first time, it doesn't work. Most things don't work anyway. My friend Charlie Jones would tell you that nothing works. But most things don't work the first time you try them out. Peter Drucker says this: most business ideas fail at least the first few times. But what you have to do is try it and try it again and try it again. So I would learn a way to answer an objection or to get an appointment or something else that wouldn't work. I tried again, it wouldn't work. I finally made a decision which changed my life, and I pass it on to you. I would try something 10 times before I pass judgment on it. If it was a good idea, I'd give it 10 tries before I pass judgment. I wouldn't try it once and quit, because that's what everybody else does. Either that or they don't try it at all. So I try it 10 times, and I'd rush out. I learned something new in the morning, I'd rush out, and I'd say, I'm going to talk to 10 people today, I'm going to try it on all 10. And this is what I found. If it's a good idea, about the 5th or 6th or 7th time, it'll start to work. And then you own it. It becomes an arrow in your quiver. It's a piece of knowledge, it's a piece of skill that you have at the skin level, and you have it for the rest of your career. So I began to practice, and my sales went up and up and up until they made me a sales mangler. They said, you know, whatever you're smoking, find some other people and share it with them because it's working. And so I began recruiting people. I ran ads in the paper and I recruited people and I took them in and I taught them to sell and they went out. And today, all over the world, I meet millionaires and multimillionaires, people who run industries, run multiple industries, who I literally started on the street with no money, stone broke. One of my best guys was in jail. I had to bail him out of jail, get a lawyer, get him off the charges, pay his fine, dress him, and teach him how to sell. Today he's worth about $25 million. I had breakfast with him last year, and we were talking. I called him up. He lives a long way away. Called him up. We had breakfast, and I said, I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished. He's a major power in his community, owns multiple businesses. He's very high up in several of the major organizations. He said, I said, you've done so much with your life. It's phenomenal. He said, yeah. And he looks like this. He said, And I still remember where I started. He said it was in that jail that you bailed me out of all those years ago. It's not in his bio, by the way. It's not mentioned. Anyway, so what I found was that you can learn anything you need to learn to achieve any goal that you want for yourself. Now, here's an important point. And for instance, if I asked Dale, Dale said to me, Brian, would you give me a call later on this week? And I said, sure, I'll give you a call later on this week. And I'll walk away. Well, what would Dale say? Well, don't you want my phone number? I say, no. What, you live in Phoenix? Phoenix is pretty good. This is simple. Just certain numbers. I'll just punch the buttons till I get through. Punch. Dale, is that you? No? Again, punch. Dale, is that you? No, punch. It's only 7 digits plus an area code. Hey, what could be harder than that, huh? Is that you? Now, how long would it take me to get through to Dale if I just punched the buttons at random?
3 years.
You never would. It's hundreds of thousands of millions of words. You know how many Social Security numbers we have? Made up of what? 4, 2, 3, 9 digits? Here's 10 digits. In other words, hundreds of millions. I would never get through to Dale. But what if Dale gave me his number and it was 235-1234, and I wrote it down. I got the area.